Hello and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City as we bring you virtual worship for another week. It's wonderful to know that wherever you are, you're here with us in spirit. We're all together in our hearts as we join together for this worship service today. It might be morning, afternoon, or you might be watching it right before you go to bed. Who knows? But we're glad that you're here no matter what time it is. I know that there are people, many of our folks who are here in Salt Lake City who are watching this worship service, and we welcome you. But there are also folks who are from further away, folks from our congregations in St. George or Ogden or elsewhere in Utah, or from other states who may be joining us. And we are delighted that you're part of our community, even if just for an hour. Welcome to you. Let's begin with these opening words by my colleague and friend, the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson. What is it that calls you here, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make that change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? It is relationship, the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, our truths, this virtual space, our hearts. Come, let us worship together.
Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather together to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. If you've got your hymn books at home, pull them out. Hymn number 131. Love will guide us. As we found out last week, the words should pop up in front of you pretty fast. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. Love can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
That's one of my favorites. I love it, and I'm so glad we sang it this morning. I'm glad you could join us to sing that song. So for many of us, it is the end of a third week of society being closed down, for the most part. It's hard to believe that it's only been 3 weeks. If you're like me, the days might be starting to run together just a little bit, and it can be hard to remember what day it is, much less how long this has been going on. As I mentioned in my homily last week, I think it's probably too soon to start to make sense of all this yet. I'm reminded of a friend I knew in high school who had this big antique car. It was a Studebaker, And as you know, maybe that's not the ideal car for someone who's learning to drive. But I remember that he was always getting into rear enders with other people because the car just didn't stop on a dime. He had to learn the hard way that when we're moving at top speed, the stopping distance might be further than you think. Most of us have done pretty well these last few weeks just to avoid getting into a crash and just skid to a halt. Never mind changing direction or even knowing which direction to go. Many of us are feeling the pressure to carry on just like nothing has changed, or even to make the most of this time and be hyper-productive. And somehow, we're also supposed to be positive, even magnanimous and generous. And yet, that might be turning out to be harder than we expected. More likely, we found ourselves snapping at the people we do interact with, jumping to conclusions, blanking out or drifting off during conversations. All those things that we do when we're stressed out. Things that we know aren't helpful, and yet we do them anyway. God knows I've done it too. So as you go through this week, I invite you to join me in stopping at least once each day to see if you can find a still place inside you. It doesn't have to be a formal practice of meditation or prayer or anything fancy like that. Just listen to your own breath for long enough to feel like you're inside your own body. Give yourself the gift of a moment to name your feelings, especially the ones you've been ignoring. Some of us are surprised to find that we're angry, more frightened than we want to let on, worried about the future and letting our worries get the best of us. There might be guilty feelings about staying home when there are so many who can't. Or if you're working in an essential function, a sense of helplessness or overwhelm or frustration about the limitations of your circumstances. Whatever it is you're feeling is okay to feel, as long as you really do let yourself feel it, so that you can make a conscious decision about what to do with those feelings. And then let yourself rest for a moment in that stillness and knowing. A work that has crossed my digital desk several times this week is the 46th Psalm from the Hebrew Scriptures, which has the famous line, "Be still and know that I am God." It doesn't mean that God's in control of everything or that God has a plan for everything. But it does mean that each of us has a place inside where we can find stillness, shelter, and equanimity if we're willing to just stop and be still for a moment. If God language doesn't work for you, that's okay. You might try a phrase like, "Be still and know that you are loved. Be still and know that you are not alone. Be still and know that life goes on." Or you might come up with a phrase of your own. I like to repeat this phrase, "Be still and know that I am God," to myself while I'm doing a routine task like washing the dishes, while my hands are down in that soapy warm water, or while I'm waiting for the dishes to soak a little bit. I'd like to share with you this poem by Peregrine Morcaw Williams, who also finds God while washing the dishes. It's called A Prayer for Salvation. Here I am, God. Here I am. Here I am with the dishes in the sink, the dust on the shelves, the skin on my hands, which is drying out and starting to crack. My appetite has gone without any other bodies to remind my body of itself. I can pray for salvation, but my bones know this is all there is. This is the day God has given us to live in. There is no heaven, child, no heaven apart from the dishes and the dust and the skin on your hands. If you want heaven, this is what you have to work with, you who are a child of the Creator. God has given you all she can. Pay attention.
David, thank you. If we ever get away from virtual worship services and we're back in this chapel, I'm going to sit right over there. The piano's over there. I'm going to have my chair there because it feels like I might as well be in the piano. I just love the sound right here. And so, don't be surprised. This stool will be right up against the piano. I just love it. And of course, it'll be an auction item. Once a year, somebody else is going to be able to sit inside the piano. It has grown apparent over the course of the last few weeks that Monica and I have chosen poetry for our readings and even for meditation. And today is no exception, other than the poem that I've selected it actually reads more like a story, but its composition and the way it is laid out really resembles a poem. There's no doubt about it. It's a poem. In fact, it's found in the anthology of poetry edited by Garrison Keillor called Good Poems for Hard Times. Well, I think these times are pretty hard, at least hard enough to warrant, hopefully, a good poem. Keillor feels, as probably most of us do, that the meaning of poems is to give us courage. Maybe that's why Monica and I have just felt instinctively that's what poems do in hard times. They give us courage. A poem is not a puzzle that the reader is obliged to solve. A poem is meant to poke you, get you to buck up, pay attention, look alive, get a grip, get the picture, pull up your socks. Oh, if only poetry were taught that way from the early grades on. Wouldn't that be something? We might now be a nation that appreciated poetry a whole lot more, which would make such a difference, I believe. It would make so much more possible. Garrison Keillor says that what makes poetry so distinguishable is the miracle of incantation in rendering the gravity and grace and beauty of the ordinary world and thereby lending courage to strangers. That's a pretty tall order for a poem, and I don't know if the poem I selected can live up to that. The poem is called Somewhere I'll Find You, and the poet is Phoebe Hansen. Now, the poem, as you will note, certainly dwells in the ordinary world and perhaps offers a tinge of grace as a young girl allows herself to be wooed by a young man, forcing her to break the severe rules set by her strict religious father. Well, I hope this poem sets the stage for our later discussion on love and what love can stand to learn while lovers are being forced to hang together for indefinite periods of time while being quarantined. I mean, how much togetherness can love really tolerate? So this poem merely greases the wheel to get us thinking about love, at least in its early stages, and all the romantic visions we have for the future of relationships, thinking the relationship will never, ever change. Somewhere I'll Find You, Phoebe Hansen. Ready? So we moved from my small town in western Minnesota to St. Paul, where I had to go to Murray High, a school with more people than in the entire town of Sacred Heart. And I had to walk 2.5 miles every day because there were no school buses. But it turned out to be not so bad after all, because I met a boy in confirmation class who let me ride on the handlebars of his bike on the way home from school. And one Sunday, my dad even let this boy pick me up and go for a walk in Como Park. Since, after all, the paths were safe, filled with many families swarming with children, and even though my dad knew the devil went about the city like a roaring lion seeking whom he might devour, he let me go with this boy, because after all, this boy was a Lutheran. And we had sung together, sitting side by side in church, "Yield not to temptation, for yielding is sin. Every victory will help you some other to win. Fight manfully onward, dark passions subdue. Look only to Jesus, he'll carry you through." But as soon as we left my house, this boy said he was going to take me some other place I'd like very much, and it was going to be a surprise. So off we went on the streetcar, and new to the city, I had no idea where we were going until we got off, and we were standing in front of a movie marquee, and I said, "I can't go in. You know my father doesn't let me go to movies. It's a sin." But he gently guided me with his seductive hands, saying, "Just come into the lobby to talk." And there below the sign, "Somewhere I'll Find You," starring Clark Gable and Lana Turner, in a torrid tale of love between two people caught in the chaos of war, he persuaded me at least to go inside and sit down and watch part of the movie. And if I didn't like it, we could get right back on the streetcar and go to Como Park. So I decided, since I already was in the lobby, den of inequities, surrounded by posters of Jezebel movie queens and devilish leading men, I was doomed anyway. So I might as well go into the darkness with him and even let him put his arm around me and hold my hand. And that's the way we've been ever since.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. As you can probably imagine, we don't have a lot in the way of announcements today, but I do want to just bring back to your mind the things that are still going on here at the church, even during this unusual time. We do have our Sunday morning virtual coffee hour. We've tried to make it a little easier for you to find this week. The link is right on the front page of our website, slcuu.org, where you will find the video link for the Sunday sermon and the Zoom link for our virtual coffee hour right next to it. So we'd love for you all to join. There's not the limit for the room is quite large, so you are welcome. And don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you as we chat together. Stay close together as a community. I do want to remind you also that we have a Zoom catch-up on Thursday afternoons, 11:30 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or until we all get hungry and want lunch. So you can join me on Zoom. The link will be in the Torch email, and if you're not checking the Torch, I encourage you to do it, because that's where all the information that you need for what's going on at church can be found. Finally, I do want to just put it back into your mind that we are in our pledge season, even during these unusual times. We encourage everyone to get your pledges in. There are a number of ways to do it. You can find links in the Torch email. You can also go to our website and go right up to the right-hand corner and click the donate button that you'll see. It's got a little heart, and it'll take you to the page where you can make one-time payments, or you can create an account and set up your regular pledging. And while you're there, don't forget to go ahead and pay on your 2019-2020 pledges as well. We do want to make sure that those are still coming in, even as we get our pledges in for next year, because we will have church next year. It's always going on. It may feel like we've skidded to a halt, but we have not. Church is going on all the time, and we're delighted that you're part of it. Tom?
Hey, Monica.
Hi.
So here's the million-dollar question for you. How are you dealing with stress? And the reason I ask that is I just read this little piece by David Brooks, and he talks about how mental health is an issue during this quarantine time and all the worries and concerns we have about the stress. And he didn't know he was really stressful himself until he realized that he was god-awful tired every afternoon at 5 o'clock. Boom. Mr. Stress comes knocking at his door. And I thought, it feels like this stealth thing going on. And I have no reason in the world to be exhausted at 5 o'clock other than, that's stress. How are you dealing with that kind of stress?
Well, I agree with Brooks that it's sneaky right now because it doesn't seem like we should be as stressed as we are, and yet I think that many of us feel even more stressed than we were. The volume of work that people are doing is not less, by and large. So for me, it's all about getting my sense of perspective back. When I'm stuck inside and I feel the walls closing in, I just go outside, take a long walk, look up at the sky that's so much bigger than me, and remember that I'm just a small part of everything. There's a wonderful saying, too, that a mentor told me when I was in seminary, and those of you who are Christians or who appreciate Jesus will appreciate this. She said, "The Lord sent a Savior, and it's not me." And that helps me to remember that I don't have to solve every problem.
Right.
There are somebody's going to take care of it, and I just do what's my job to do.
Especially with Easter coming up next week. Thank goodness we are not the Savior. It would just we don't have
That's
to.
right.
Well, I find myself dealing with stress by actually looking back in time. Anchors, strength. This tie is a deer
nice.
tie, one of my favorites. It was given to me by an old parishioner here many years ago, Martin Zwick, who was the principal clarinetist for the Utah Symphony. I'm sure many of our older folks remember Marty. He was fabulous. The other night, Mary and I saw an old, I guess it's old, 1991 movie, L.A. Story, and it was just the stress just dissolved instantly. And also musically, I was thinking about how phenomenal people have been, the volunteers, the tremendous outpouring of love and support and checking in on people and neighbors and getting groceries and all that kind of stuff.
Indeed.
And I found myself spontaneously singing an old Randy Newman song called "Human Kindness Overfloweth. I think it's going to rain." And just as spontaneously, Mary just chimed in, and we were just singing "Human Kindness Overflows," and I thought that really fits the day. Human kindness does overflow, and if it wasn't for that human kindness, stress would be a whole lot worse, don't you
Yeah,
think?
indeed.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? It's good to see you.
It's good to see you from 6 feet away.
Exactly. Lee measured it.
Right.
On. Great. Thanks, Monica.
Yeah, thanks.
The poem that I shared during the reading offers a classic image of new love emerging. Strong feelings, a little duplicity, a gamble here and there, and finally, a happy resolve. The final view of this young couple placed them in the forbidden and sinful movie theater watching Clark Gable and Lana Turner. And then he put his arm around her, held her hand, and if you'll recall, the last line was, "That's the way it's been ever since." Joined together. It's not unusual for new couples to believe most genuinely, oh so deeply, that they will remain physically entwined forever and ever. A blissful tangle of lovers who shall always remain inseparable. Now, this is a far cry from another poem spoken by a more seasoned veteran of love, a little sinister perhaps. And here the writer addresses a couple on their wedding day. It's called, in fact, The Wedding Poem. And the poet, Bill Home, offers a somewhat rude perspective on marriage, a view that any Twitter-pated young couple would have difficulty digesting. At one point, the speaker in the poem admonishes the couple with these 4 lines. History and experience both make clear that men and women do not hear the music of the world in the same key, rather rolling dissonances doomed to clash. History and experience both make clear that men and women do not hear the music of the world in the same key, rather rolling dissonances doomed to clash. Wow. Well, I'm glad that I was never subjected to that kind of harsh observation on my wedding day, but nonetheless, it's a perspective that serves as a springboard to the topic at hand, namely, how well relationships weather their togetherness, especially now when forced together, let's say, in a pandemic or something like that. Now, I've been inspired by two different sources to comment on how couples manage during COVID-19, sequestered together for weeks on end with no prospect for change clearly delineated. Now, the first influence of my thinking came from a cartoon that a friend of mine sent. It featured an elderly woman seated on a chair, knitting, innocently enough. And above the picture it says, after 2 weeks of quarantine with her husband, Gertrude decided to knit him a scarf. And as one examines the cartoon more carefully, we see that she's actually knitting him a noose. Well, I guess certain fantasies evolve while cemented together with one's partner over an extended period of time. My second source of inspiration came from a little ditty in The New Yorker, an article that made clear that being cooped up with a spouse in quarantine is not necessarily as romantic as one may have thought once upon a very long time ago. As millions of people in the United States now find themselves ordered by the government to be quarantined, we need to look at China, the first country to shut down. China is now in the process of opening back up. And in the city of Xi'an, more than 10 million people were placed under lockdown. When restrictions were eased, the city's divorce rate spiked. Indeed, couples do not hear the music of the world in the same key, especially when confined to close quarters over a long duration. Now, psychologists in the U.S. predict the same increased rate of divorce in this country as the pandemic unfolds. Some of the stress points fraying the nerves of couples include some issues never tackled before, like, I don't think you're washing your hands often enough. Or, are you washing your hands long enough to sing happy birthday twice at a moderate tempo? Why do you constantly have to touch all the doorknobs? Why are you using up so much toilet paper? I mean, these are interesting times for couples. We know that forced togetherness does not always end well, just as forced togetherness during the holidays often results, in divorce. The coronavirus quarantine takes that same claustrophobic feeling that we have during the holidays and just raises it to a higher level. I was reminded of my role just recently with the quarantine and all. I was reminded of my role in premarital counseling as I look back over the many years. I have actually kept a tally, noting that in my 33 years as minister here at First Church in Salt Lake City, I have officiated 1,163 weddings. My count of premarital counseling sessions is less precise, but it has to be somewhere between 500 and 600 couples, each session extending over 2 visits. So there have been quite a few discussions with couples who were hopelessly in love, which is good, but the downside is that they couldn't imagine ever hearing the music of the world in different keys. They're still at the stage of disbelieving that they could ever find themselves disentangled from each other. And so, premarital counseling is interesting. Most couples think they're quite prepared for it, anticipating ahead of time the subjects that we're going to be covering. So they're ready and eager to demonstrate they have it all together as far as covering the typical subjects like sex, religion, and who's going to take out the garbage. Once we get past that, I give them a quiz that they must answer separately, and then we compare answers as though we were playing the dating game or something like that. And then we discuss some areas they had not predicted in advance, and the sessions finally become real and honest. Intensity varies with each couple as we address, how many children they plan for, how comfortable a lifestyle they need in order to be happy. How do they deal with parents and in-laws? And do they think changes will need to take place about how often they're expected to visit the in-laws when they're actually married? Who will discipline the children and why? Who will be doing what household chores, and are they just fulfilling gender stereotypes? Who decides on vacations or how to spend a weekend? Who writes the Christmas cards, which has become less of an issue over time? But then I throw the couple a question they least expect, and which always, quite frankly, always brings them up short. I ask them, how much time do you need apart from one another? How much time do you need apart from each other? Apart? They're still holding on to each other as though watching the Clark Gable movie. This is going to be them forever, they think. Do you need personal space, I ask? It's important to you to spend some time alone, isn't it? Spending time away from your partner doesn't mean you're no longer in love or you shouldn't get married. You can actually strengthen your relationship if you take some time alone. Time to feed your spirit, tend to your own needs, staying true to who you are away from being part of a couple. And I frequently hear, why, that's being selfish. Marriage entails complete devotion to the other. Oh. Well, I'll tell you, I don't have any hard evidence, just my humble observations. But in all the heterosexual couples with whom I have this counseling, this suspicion about having time apart is held mostly by men in at least 90, if not 95% of the conversations. It's like this mental state where he gets her into the movie theater by whatever devious means, has his arm around her, and is never going to let go. And I want to say, someday, she's going to knit you a very special scarf. So I tried to make it clear, usually with the support of the bride, that having personal space for yourself and respecting the space of your partner helps strengthen every couple. Well, having gained a little courage by now, the bride may say to the groom, you've got your basement, or you have your garage, you have your man cave. I need a room of my own. Well, That does segue nicely to the classic Virginia Woolf book called A Room of One's Own. I'm amazed that fewer and fewer couples know anything about Virginia Woolf these days, but, well, that might be another subject for another day. A Room of One's Own actually comprises two of Virginia Woolf's essays put together, published 1929. It may well be considered a feminist manifesto, as Woolf laments the dearth of women writers attributed to their not having a room of their own. This is to be understood both literally and figuratively. The role of women, unless they come from nobility, the role of women consists of performing household chores and waiting upon their husbands. They have no space for themselves. Aside from being highly critical of society not considering women worthy of higher education, Virginia Woolf warns women of their precarious station in life. Women are idealized in fiction, written by men, but are really powerless in the patriarchy of society. A Room of One's Own will always be remembered for introducing the idea of Shakespeare's sister, Judith, who is pure fiction but serves the point well. If a woman had Shakespeare's talent as a writer, she would have been denied the opportunity to develop them. Lacking a room of her own to write, to harness her creativity and just put that on a page, she is treated instead as a slave to her husband. Judith Shakespeare is trapped by what is expected of a woman. She is chastised whenever she even just picks up a book, for surely this means that she has abandoned some other household chore. So a room of her own, I try to explain, has come to mean the availability of personal space. I say you and your partner may be a match made in heaven, but you are not the same person. You are individuals with your own dreams, your own interests, your own goals. You need a room of your own to pursue them. Now, we don't have to think of a room literally, just the need for personal space to focus on oneself. I wonder, is this the time to read to this poor, unsuspecting couple? Should I read to them the poem about men and women not hearing the music of the world in the same key? I don't. But perhaps it would do them some good. Well, now, couples find themselves in these coronavirus times a little closer together than they might ordinarily experience, a little cooped up, one might say. There are infinite anecdotes, probably more than infinite anecdotes, about this topic. Now, some of my favorites include the couple, both divorce lawyers, married for 21 years, and they were trapped together for 2 weeks in the same little room aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship. The ship was quarantined off Japan. They survived splendidly because there was no need to argue about who was supposed to pick up the groceries and who had to clean the litter box. So they probably found some other things to argue about, but they're just happy where they were. New arguments, it was a delight, they did well. Another couple on the cruise ship, both 24 years old, survived the quarantine with her cross-stitching a Christmas ornament in March, and he decided to take up juggling. They each preserved and respected their separate interests. To come to think of it, I wonder, I wish everybody were here in this church, because I would ask you, how many of you during this quarantine have thought about juggling? I mean, if you ever had that wild idea, I certainly have, why not do it now? It's the perfect time for it. Maybe next week I can do a little juggling. Let's see how far I get. But my favorite one was the couple who managed well in these tight quarters in the cruise trip. Their advice, after all was said and done, was, and I quote from the couple, carve out a space of your own away from your partner. So when he, if you can imagine, just in this little room on this cruise ship, so when he went online in these tight quarters, she went into the closet. She said, think of it as a quarantine within a quarantine. In the more than 90 years since Virginia Woolf published her book, a room of one's own has assumed a greater and greater metaphorical significance. In a quarantine, sequestered, locked down, shelter in place, demanding a new normal for us all, it may not be a bad idea to remember the importance of having a room of one's own. Even if you have to carve out space in a closet, spending time away from your partner isn't a sign that the relationship is struggling. It's a sign that you are caring for yourself, and your relationship will be so much better for it. So be it. And now let us join together in singing a hymn. I'm not even going to tell you the name of it. It's going to be kind of a surprise.
Getting to know you, getting to know all about you, getting to like you, getting to hope you like me, getting to know you, putting it my way, but nicely. You are precisely my cup of tea. Getting to know you, and getting to feel free and easy. When I'm with you, getting to know what to say. Haven't you noticed? Suddenly I'm bright and breezy because of all the beautiful and new things I'm learning about you day by day.
These unusual times have moved us to look at life differently. For one thing, we may think twice about boarding a cruise ship. But more broadly, we may gain a needed change in perspective. Unthinking, we do take so much for granted. Home, friends, family, even our partners. And then along comes a great interruption, and suddenly it all looks different and feels different, and we're forced to slow down and to reimagine. Reimagine practically everything, from money to health to work habits, and even reimagine love itself. On behalf of our staff here at First Church, we hope you are bucking up, pulling up your socks. We hope, in other words, that you are well. We grieve along with everyone the loss of life and the suffering through illness, and the hardships caused by an unexpected poverty. As a church community, we hope we can serve one another faithfully, grow and learn together, and someday reimagine a new normal in which we will feel more tightly bound to one another.